everyone, and welcome back to Module 7, the election of FDR and the New Deal. So, just a little bit of background on FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So he was pretty much a part of the New York elite, right? So he comes from a very prominent family. He's cousins with Theodore Roosevelt, who was the president before him. He was governor of New York. Despite him being from this very wealthy background, he was sympathetic to poor people and is seen as a social reformer. And he fought for reform after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, if you're familiar with that, which helped with worker safety rights after a fire in a factory. So that's a bit of background on him, a little bit more. FDR contracts polio. So during his presidency, it's actually kept like a very hush-hush secret that FDR used a wheelchair because he is unable to stand. But for presidential addresses in person, they would put on these like very painful stilts on his legs that would like dig into his legs to make it like look like he could stand up, but he did use a wheelchair. And so he becomes really dependent on his wife Eleanor. She basically like is the president for a bit when he's incapacitated or feeling sick. So that's just kind of a background on him. He does run for president in 1932. So when we are like officially in the Great Depression and things are not looking good, and he runs on this platform of the New Deal. So we'll talk more about that. He doesn't really have an idea of what that is, but just that we need to make a new deal for the American people. It's very much focused on working men and getting men back to work to help stimulate the economy overall. Essentially, if you could see from your electoral map activity, he just had to not be Herbert Hoover and he would win. So he wins everything but 6 states, which, is kind of unheard of. So this is all the states he wins. That's what we call winning in a landslide. And when FDR becomes president, he is a very transformative president. And he basically changes how, to this day, we think about what the president can do. And he creates this concept of the first 100 days, which is essentially how much can I get done and can I get passed within my first 100 days in office in order to set the tone for his presidency. And kind of like, what are your priorities is what you get done in your first 100 days. He has this new ability to communicate with Americans. So we'll see him utilize the radio to talk directly to the American people about his plan and how to navigate the Depression. So that there develops a new relationship. The fact that FDR uses the radio and speaks to the American people in their homes. So the American people love him and trust him because of this. And we have, FDR is going to expand the role of the president extremely, which, some people are not too fond of if they believe in a more limited government, but some people really admire his ability to not care what other people think and work for the interest of the American people. So he has this major task ahead of him. The federal government, right, we're in the midst of the Depression and no one has a true plan of how we're going to get out of it. And so FDR will dive into this a little bit deeper, but he wants to expand the power of the forgotten man, basically the poor people at the bottom of society, the unemployed poor people, and targeting his legislation based on the forgotten man in mind. And right, it's his job to lead the country out of the Depression. So we'll answer our first question here if you want to pause the video. Why do you think it's important that FDR could now more easily communicate with the American people via the radio? So why could that be important? All right, let's continue. So the first thing FDR does is he creates what's called the Brains Trust, which is just a bunch of smart people to help, you know, conference with him and brainstorm how they are going to tackle the Great Depression. And this is the first time that, ideas for legislation, on a large scale could come from the White House and could come from the executive branch and not just the legislative branch or Congress. So FDR, he signs 16 pieces of new legislation within the first 100 days with the help of the Brains Trust. That is extreme. It's extremely hard to get a bill signed into law. So to pass 16 in 100 days is very impressive for a president. So he's given us opposite energy of Hoover, where Hoover's like, I'll try to get people to volunteer to give their money. This is like, guns ablazing. Let's pass as many things as possible. So the Brains Trust themselves are Columbia University professors. They come up with this idea to do what we will call fireside chats or radio broadcasts. And the first one is called The Forgotten Man. And so they come up with this idea that will reform society from the bottom up. So survival of the forgotten man, the people at the bottom of society, is going to mean the health of the entire nation and the entire economy. So the idea is that if the people at the bottom are doing well, that everyone is doing well. We'll kind of dive more into that. So this is called the bottom-up approach. So let's contrast that. Hoover's approach is top-down, right? Have the people at the top give their money to the people downwards, or, give tax breaks to the people at the top, and then the wealth would, go to the people at the bottom. FDR's idea is the opposite, that if you're like baseline lowest member of society, right? If the poorest person in your nation has a house, has food, and has a job, if that's your lowest member of society, that means everyone else must be doing super well. So that's the idea of reform from the bottom up. So let's pause here and get your opinion on your notes. In your opinion, what seems more effective in helping the economy? The bottom up or top down approach, and why? So think through that for a minute. Okay, so the New Deal we refer to as having three major goals, which we refer to as the 3 R's. So we'll talk about in your projects, you'll have a ton of different New Deal agencies, which we call the alphabet soup, and they'll fall under one or two of the 3 R's. So the first R is going to be relief. Provide relief to those who are in need, meaning the unemployed, the homeless, the starving. Give them jobs, give them housing, give them food. So provide relief to the people in need. Recovery, we have to repair the damage to the U.S. economy. So get banks back up and running and stop them from shutting down. Get people to put their money back into banks. Get people to trust the president. And then lastly, reform. So this is really important. It's not just like stopping the bleed, right? Like stopping the crisis. The third R is let's make sure the Great Depression never happens again. Let's make sure we put mechanisms in place to make sure that banks don't shut down if too many people try and withdraw their money from the bank. Let's make sure that if people are out of work, there's some protection from the government, like some unemployment insurance that you could collect on. So those are the 3 R's of the New Deal. So we have this 3-pronged strategy. One that's like at the top of FDR's list is to fix the banking crisis. So get banks back up and running, get people putting their money back in banks, so trust the banks. 2, we have to jumpstart the economy. So I've kind of hinted at this. We need people to start spending their money again. So the idea is the federal government will, create a lot of projects and programs, put people to work. Therefore, people start to get a paycheck, and then they will spend that paycheck at various businesses. So then all the businesses start doing better because people are shopping there, buying from them. And then the third strategy is tackling agriculture and the sick industry of agriculture. So we need to reduce the size and the amount that farmers are growing. So have the government pay for those excess crops, or pay them to not plant as much. So that's our three-pronged strategy to start tackling the depression. Another thing FDR does is he repeals prohibition. So this is when we see the one amendment undoing another amendment, which is the only time that's occurred. So we have the 18th Amendment bans alcohol. The 21st undoes prohibition. The idea was if people could buy alcohol again, you could tax it a lot. So if you tax it, that would bring in money to the federal government that they could give for these new programs for the New Deal. We also get off the gold standard. So we would have our money, backed purely by golds. So you need enough gold in order to print the dollar bills. But if you can back your money by other precious metals, you can print more dollars. So does that cause inflation? Yeah, but it's kind of like we have bigger fish to fry, right? There's bigger issues out there. So print more dollars, even though they're inflated, at least more money will be circulating in the economy. Right? There'll be more dollars out there for businesses to collect and for people to spend. Another thing FDR does is he declares a bank holiday, and under the Banking Act, so banks were closed for 4 days. And so all banks had to be closed. The federal government would go in and assess the strength of the bank. So they would say, okay, this bank is weak. They don't have, enough bankers, enough money coming in, or they took risky loans. These banks need to shut down. These should stay open. And made sure that the health of the bank was good. Then we have our first fireside chat. We talked about the forgotten man. So FDR was known for his fireside chats. He would speak over the radio directly to the American people. And this is a big deal because people would be in their homes listening to the president. His first one, which you'll listen to in an activity, is focused on instilling confidence in our banking system. So to get people to stop withdrawing their money and stop keeping their money under mattresses and in their houses and put it back into banks, and that you could trust banks again. And it works, right? So by the next year, 90% of banks remained open. So rather than having, thousands of banks closing over the course of months, we have banks staying open. And that was because people started to trust FDR. He's speaking directly to them, and he's explaining his plan for the bank holiday in the Banking Act. So he's explaining his plan, and people believe him, trust him, and it works, and the health of the banks is improved. So the goal of the New Deal is that we can increase people's purchasing power by putting people to work. So the idea is you take the unemployed people who are like a burden to society, right? They need resources from the federal government. So take the unemployed people, put them to work for the federal government in a myriad of programs. Then they get a paycheck from the government, and then they'll spend that paycheck at other businesses. So, and that would kickstart the economy, right? They spend their paycheck at businesses. Those businesses then make a profit. Then they hire more people, so you have less unemployed or increased wages, more spending, right? And that eventually would kickstart the economy and we would go back to normal. So that is the goal. Let's answer our last question on our notes. What do you think was the American people's response to the New Deal? So how do you think they took this plan? Because you are getting like a handout as a job, but you're not just getting a check in the mail. And do you think they would like this plan? And so this really radically transforms what we think the federal government can do. Right, we couldn't even take the crops from the country and bring it to the starving people in the cities, but now pretty much all these, a quarter of the Americans are unemployed, and they're pretty much all going to get jobs from the government and get checks from the government. So this is work relief, not direct relief. They have to work for their money. And so this is a big departure because it's a modified handout. It's not just getting a check in the mail. You have to work for it, but you're still getting relief from the government. This is meant to be temporary. The New Deal is meant to be temporary, but you'll see through your assignments that many are still around to this day. So this is a huge transformation of what we think the government can do and how policies can make, a very large impact on American society. So we'll end this module here. Thank you so much and good luck on your assignments.